A dying K-9 led a broken Navy SEAL beneath a forgotten inn, where a buried secret waited for 140 years. Caleb Ryder arrived in the Colorado mountains with $10, a haunted past, and a retired military dog that refused to leave his side. The old stagecoach inn everyone feared sat buried beneath snow and silence, its stone hearth cold for over a century. But on the first night inside, Ranger began growling at the fireplace, and somewhere deep under the mountain, something started moving in the dark. Comment 1 if you'd open the cellar door, or 0 if you'd run, and tell us where you're watching from. Snow drifted across the highway in long white ribbons as Caleb Ryder crossed the mountain pass into Black Hollow. The old Ford pickup groaned with every mile. Rust ate at the wheel wells. The heater only worked when it wanted to. One headlight flickered against the falling snow like a dying candle. But the truck kept moving because Caleb kept moving. And at 44 years old, that was about the only thing he still knew how to do. Beside him sat Ranger. The Belgian Malinois stared through the windshield with the stillness of a soldier standing watch. His muzzle had gone gray over the years, and a pale scar cut through the fur above one eye, a reminder of a mission neither of them had escaped clean. Even now, retired and limping slightly in cold weather, Ranger carried himself with the alert discipline of a military dog who had spent years learning that hesitation could get people killed. The snow thickened as they descended into the valley. Black Hollow appeared slowly through the storm. A gas station. A diner with a flickering neon sign. A boarded-up hardware store. A church with a crooked steeple. The mountains rose around the town like dark walls, sealing it away from the rest of the world. Caleb tightened both hands on the steering wheel. He hated towns. Too many eyes. Too many sounds. Too many places for memories to crawl out of the dark. His chest tightened as the truck rolled past the diner. For one brief second, the laughter spilling through the doorway sounded like screaming overseas. His pulse surged instantly. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. Threat, movement, gunfire. The memory flashed hot and violent behind his eyes. Dust, smoke, children running, the blast wave. Then silence. Caleb blinked hard and forced himself back into the present. Snow, mountains, Colorado. Not Syria. Not anymore. Ranger turned his head slowly and pressed his nose against Caleb's arm, grounding him. The dog always knew. Caleb exhaled shakily and scratched behind Ranger's ears. "I'm good," he muttered, but his voice sounded hollow even to himself. He parked near the county clerk's office just before dusk. The building looked older than the town itself, built from faded red brick with snow piled high against the windows. Caleb stepped out into bitter cold, his boots crunching through ice while Ranger jumped down beside him. People noticed them immediately. They always did. A hard-faced man with military posture and a scarred working dog drew attention in places like this. An older woman pumping gas stopped and stared openly. Two men outside the diner lowered their voices as Caleb passed. Ranger stayed close to Caleb's left side, eyes scanning constantly. Working. Always working. Inside the clerk's office, the air smelled like dust, old paper, and stale coffee. A gray-haired man looked up from behind the counter. "You lost, son?" Caleb removed his gloves slowly. "Looking for county surplus properties." The man studied him for several seconds. Then his gaze shifted toward Ranger. "That military dog?" "Retired." The man leaned back in his chair. "You military yourself?" "Used to be." The answer ended the conversation. The clerk seemed wise enough not to ask more. He opened a drawer and slid over a thin folder. Not much left nobody wants. Caleb flipped through papers silently until one photograph caught his attention. A 2-story limestone building standing alone beneath snow-covered mountains. Broken windows, sagging porch, massive chimney. Something about it felt familiar, like a memory he couldn't place. What's this? The clerk chuckled softly. That old place? He shook his head. Mercy House Inn, built back in the stagecoach days. Been abandoned near 70 years now. Caleb studied the photograph longer. There was something about the building's shape. Solid, defensive, built to endure weather. The kind of structure men trusted during storms. How much? The clerk gave a crooked grin. $10. Caleb looked up slowly. You serious? County just wants the taxes cleared so we can stop dealing with it. The clerk lowered his voice slightly. Truth is, folks around here think the place is cursed. From outside the office came sudden laughter. One of the men from the diner had wandered in. Tell them about the winters, Earl. The clerk rolled his eyes. The man stepped closer. Heavy set, red nose from whiskey. Place eats people. Caleb said nothing. The man pointed toward the photo. Every owner goes crazy up there. Snow cuts the road off half the year. Folks hear things inside the walls at night. Enough, the clerk muttered. But the man kept going. My granddad said travelers disappeared there back during the silver days. Whole wagon teams vanished. Caleb closed the folder calmly. I'll take it. The room went silent. Even the clerk blinked. You sure? Caleb reached into his pocket and placed a wrinkled $10 bill on the counter. It was all he had left. The last money from a life already burned to the ground. The clerk stared at the bill for a long moment before slowly taking it. You really buying Mercy House with your last $10? Caleb shrugged faintly. Not doing much good in my pocket. The drunk man laughed loudly. Hell, this'll be fun to watch. But Caleb ignored him. The clerk disappeared into a back room and returned carrying an old iron key attached to a leather tag. The key looked ancient, heavy, cold, like something handed down through generations. The clerk placed it gently in Caleb's palm. Road's rough getting there. Snow's worse higher up. Caleb nodded once. As he turned to leave, the clerk spoke again. For what it's worth, place used to help stranded travelers during blizzards, long before my time. He hesitated. My mother used to say people survived because of that inn. Caleb looked back briefly. Then maybe it deserves another winter. Outside, darkness had settled over Black Hollow. Snow swirled beneath yellow streetlights as Caleb climbed back into the truck. Ranger jumped into the passenger seat immediately, ears forward. Caleb started the engine. The old pickup coughed twice before catching. Then they drove north out of town, up toward the mountains. The road narrowed quickly, winding through dense pine forests and steep ravines buried beneath fresh snow. Ice cracked beneath the tires. No other headlights appeared. No houses. No signs of life. Only wilderness. And silence. The inn emerged through the storm nearly an hour later. Caleb slowed the truck automatically. Mercy House stood alone on a ridge overlooking the valley below. Moonlight filtered weakly through clouds, casting silver light across the old limestone walls. The building looked wounded, but not defeated. The porch sagged slightly. Several windows were boarded shut. Snow had gathered along the roofline, but the massive chimney still stood solid against the storm. Caleb felt something strange tighten in his chest. Recognition, not of the place itself, but of what it had once been. Shelter. He parked near the porch and killed the engine. The silence afterward felt enormous. Wind hissed through the pine trees. Ranger climbed down first and immediately began circling the property, alert, focused. Caleb grabbed his duffel bag and approached the front door. The iron key scraped loudly inside the lock. For one long second, nothing happened. Then the mechanism groaned open. The smell hit him immediately. Dust, cold stone, old wood, ash. The inside of the inn was dark except for pale moonlight spilling through broken windows. Caleb stepped carefully across warped floorboards while Ranger moved silently ahead. The common room opened before them, large, empty, and dominated by the massive stone hearth built into the far wall. Even in darkness, the fireplace commanded attention. 6 feet wide, blackened with old soot. Iron hooks still hanging beside the opening. Caleb walked toward it slowly. Something about the hearth unsettled him. Not fear, memory. His father had built fireplaces in Wyoming when Caleb was a boy. Big stone hearths in hunting cabins and ranch homes. He used to say, "A good fire keeps bad nights outside." Caleb hadn't thought about his father in years. Ranger sniffed around the room carefully before settling near the hearth. Caleb unpacked silently. 1 blanket, 1 canteen, a flashlight, a combat knife. The last pieces of a collapsed life. He sat against the cold wall beside the fireplace and closed his eyes. The mountain wind moaned outside, and for the first time in months, he almost felt calm. Then it happened. Ranger's head snapped upward instantly. Every muscle in the dog's body locked tight. A low growl rolled from deep in his chest. Caleb opened his eyes immediately. The old instincts surged back without thought. Threat assessment. Locate danger. Ranger was staring directly at the fireplace. Not the room, not the shadows, the hearth itself. The growl deepened. Slow. Warning. Caleb rose carefully. "Ranger." The dog didn't move. His ears stood rigid, hackles raised, eyes fixed on the black opening of the stone hearth. Then Ranger took 1 slow step backward and growled harder, as if something inside the fireplace had just moved. The wind outside suddenly slammed against the inn. The old building creaked. Ash shifted faintly inside the hearth. Caleb's pulse quickened, not from fear, from instinct. The same instinct that had kept him alive through 12 years of war. He reached slowly for the flashlight beside his duffel, and Ranger bared his teeth at the darkness inside the fireplace. The growl became almost human, warning someone unseen to stay back. Then somewhere deep inside the chimney, something made a sound. A faint, metallic scrape. Caleb froze, and Ranger lunged forward, barking violently into the black throat of the hearth. The sound exploded through the empty inn like gunfire. Outside, snow whipped harder across the mountains, and deep beneath Mercy House, something waited in the dark. Ranger's barking thundered through the empty inn. The sound ricocheted off limestone walls and exposed ceiling beams until the entire building seemed alive with it. Caleb swung the flashlight toward the hearth instantly, his military instincts overriding exhaustion. The beam cut through drifting ash and darkness. Nothing. Only black stone. Cold soot. Iron hooks dangling inside the enormous fireplace like skeletal fingers. But Ranger refused to back down. The Belgian Malinois stood planted in front of the hearth, barking with sharp, violent urgency. His teeth flashed white in the dark. Every muscle in his scarred body strained forward, as though an invisible threat stood inside the chimney. "Ranger." Caleb's voice came low and steady. The command barely reached the dog. Ranger growled harder. Then came the sound again, metal scraping against stone. Faint. Deep inside the chimney somewhere above them. Caleb's pulse slowed instead of rising. Combat had trained him strangely that way. The closer danger came, the calmer he became. His breathing steadied, his senses sharpened. He moved toward the fireplace carefully. The old floor creaked beneath his boots. Ranger shifted beside him instantly, pressing against Caleb's leg the same way he had done during raids overseas. Protective positioning, covering his handler's blind side. Caleb aimed the flashlight higher into the chimney throat. The beam illuminated thick soot and crumbling mortar. Then suddenly, A black shape exploded downward. Caleb jerked backward instinctively. Wings burst through the darkness in a frenzy of dust and ash. A raven shot out of the chimney, flapping wildly across the common room, before vanishing through a broken upstairs window. The inn fell silent again. Ranger continued growling. Caleb exhaled slowly. Just a bird. But even as he said it, he knew Ranger did not believe that. The dog remained rigid, eyes fixed on the fireplace, watching, waiting. Finally, Caleb stepped back from the hearth. "Stand down." This time Ranger obeyed, though reluctantly. The growl faded into a low rumble deep in his chest. The wind outside screamed across the ridge. Snow hammered against the old windows. Caleb glanced around the inn again. Moonlight filtered through broken boards and cracked glass, casting pale silver bars across the floor. Dust floated through the air like drifting smoke. The place smelled ancient, not rotten, not dead, just forgotten. He dragged an old wooden table closer to the fireplace and dumped splintered chair pieces into the hearth, dry enough to burn. Within minutes, flames crackled weakly against the black stone. Warmth slowly spread through the room. Ranger finally lay down beside the fire, though his amber eyes never stopped tracking the chimney. Caleb sat against the wall across from him. The flickering light softened the hard lines in his face, revealing the exhaustion underneath. 44 years old, a body full of scars, a mind that no longer knew how to sleep properly. Outside the military, people thought trauma looked dramatic, shouting, violence, breaking down. But most days PTSD felt quieter than that. It was sitting in silence while your nervous system refused to believe silence was real. It was waking up reaching for weapons that were no longer there. It was seeing dead civilians every time you closed your eyes, the children especially. Those never left. Caleb rubbed both hands slowly over his face. The fire popped sharply. Instantly his body tensed. Gunfire. For half a second he wasn't in Colorado anymore. He was back overseas. Smoke, collapsed concrete, blood running through alleyways, a little girl screaming beneath rubble. Caleb blinked hard. The inn returned around him. Fireplace. Snowstorm. Ranger. Safe. But his heart still pounded violently against his ribs. Ranger rose quietly and crossed the room. The dog pressed his head against Caleb's chest, grounding him again. Caleb closed his eyes. "You always know," he whispered. The dog stayed there until Caleb's breathing slowed. Then Ranger returned to his position beside the hearth, still watching it. Hours passed. The storm worsened. Wind rattled the entire structure hard enough to make dust drift from the ceiling beams. Snow piled against the windows in thick white waves. Mercy House groaned like an old ship at sea. Caleb didn't sleep much. Former SEALs learned to rest lightly, even in peace. But tonight, something else kept him awake. The inn itself. Every sound carried strangely through the building. Pipes knocking, floorboards shifting, soft echoes moving through empty hallways upstairs. At around 3 in the morning, Ranger suddenly lifted his head again. No barking this time. Only intense focus. Caleb followed the dog's stare toward the far side of the common room. A narrow wooden door stood half hidden beside the fireplace. Iron chains wrapped tightly around it. Rust covered the padlock. Caleb hadn't noticed it earlier. Ranger stood slowly, then walked toward the chained door. The dog sniffed along the bottom edge before stepping back uneasily. Caleb grabbed the flashlight. The beam revealed faded lettering burned into the wood beneath years of grime. Cellar. The chains looked old. Very old. Not recent security. Something else. Like someone long ago had wanted that door sealed. Ranger let out another low growl. Caleb crouched beside the door, carefully. Cold air seeped from beneath it. Deep underground cold, the kind found in caves and tunnels. He touched the rusted chain lightly. The metal shifted with a dry creak. Then something thudded softly below the floorboards. Both Caleb and Ranger froze instantly. The sound had come from beneath the cellar, not inside the room itself. Deeper. Caleb stared at the door several seconds longer, then finally stood. "Nope." Ranger looked at him. "We're not doing horror movie decisions on night one." The dog tilted his head slightly. For the first time all night, Caleb almost smiled. Almost. He returned to the fire. Morning came gray and brutal. The storm had buried the inn beneath nearly 2 feet of snow. Caleb stepped onto the porch with a steaming tin cup of black coffee, while Ranger bounded into the drifts immediately, scanning the property perimeter. The valley below looked completely isolated. No roads visible, no movement. Only endless white mountains beneath heavy clouds. The inn looked even larger in daylight. And worse. The porch leaned badly on one side. Several roof shingles had blown away completely. One upstairs window hung crooked from broken hinges, but the limestone walls remained solid, strong, built to survive. Caleb understood structures like that. He respected them. He spent the morning working automatically, military efficiency taking over. Clear snow from entrances. Check roof damage. Inventory usable materials. Create heat retention. Establish water access. By noon, he had already patched 2 broken windows with salvaged boards, cleaned debris from half the common room, and stacked enough firewood inside for 3 days. Ranger stayed close during every task, except near the hearth. Every few minutes, the dog returned there alone, sniffing the stones carefully, watching, listening. At one point, Caleb noticed Ranger pawing lightly at the floor directly beside the fireplace. Not random scratching, intentional, focused. Caleb walked over. "What is it?" Ranger scratched again. Caleb knelt and swept dust aside with his glove. The floor stones near the hearth looked slightly uneven. One corner sat lower than the others. Interesting. But before he could inspect further, a truck engine echoed faintly outside. Caleb stood immediately. Ranger moved to alert position beside him. A battered blue ranch truck crawled up the snowy road toward the inn. The driver stepped out slowly. A woman. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark winter coat. Brown hair tied back beneath a wool cap. Caleb noticed the shotgun mounted in the truck before he noticed her face. Mountain country. Normal. She approached carefully, eyeing Ranger first. "That your dog?" "Depends who's asking." She glanced at Caleb. "Relax. I'm Maggie Collins." She held up a small medical bag. "Town clerk said some idiot bought Mercy House yesterday. Figured I'd come check whether you froze overnight." Caleb said nothing. Maggie studied him openly now. The posture, the scars, the hyper-awareness in his eyes. Veterans recognized certain things in each other even without uniforms. Then Ranger stepped forward. Maggie crouched immediately. "Well, hey there." Ranger allowed her to touch him after a brief sniff. That alone told Caleb something. The dog trusted very few people. Maggie looked up again. "He military?" "Retired explosive detection K9. Her expression softened slightly. "And you?" "Retired too." The answer hung between them. Maggie didn't push further. Instead, she glanced around the ruined inn. "You really staying here?" "For now." She looked toward the mountains uneasily. "Winter gets ugly up here." "I've seen ugly." For the first time, she noticed the exhaustion beneath his calm. Not drunkenness, not instability. Something heavier. the kind men carried home from wars they couldn't fully leave behind. Before she could say anything else, Ranger suddenly turned sharply toward the hearth inside the inn. A deep growl rolled through his chest again. Maggie frowned. "What's wrong with him?" Caleb stared toward the fireplace. "I'm starting to wonder that myself." The fire inside the hearth crackled softly. Then one loose stone shifted slightly on its own. Barely an inch. But enough. Enough for both Caleb and Maggie to see it move. The room went completely silent. Ranger barked once, hard, and somewhere behind the ancient fireplace, something metallic scraped against stone again. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Maggie froze in the doorway, one hand instinctively moving toward the revolver holstered beneath her coat. Ranger stood rigid beside the hearth, teeth bared, a deep growl vibrating through the room like distant thunder. Caleb stepped closer to the fireplace slowly. The fire crackled weakly against the old stone. Then silence returned. Only the wind outside remained, hissing through cracks in the walls of Mercy House. Maggie looked at Caleb carefully. "Tell me that building settling." Caleb crouched beside the uneven hearthstones without answering. His fingers brushed cold limestone blackened by a century of soot and smoke. Up close, the loose stone Ranger had scratched at looked different from the others. Newer mortar. Not modern, but newer than the surrounding foundation. Someone had opened this section once, then sealed it again. Ranger nudged Caleb's shoulder hard with his nose, the same signal he used overseas before hidden explosives. "Careful." Caleb's eyes narrowed. He rose and crossed the room toward his duffel bag. From inside, he pulled a folding combat knife and a small pry bar worn smooth from years of use. Maggie watched him. "You seriously doing this right now?" Caleb knelt beside the hearth again. "If something's back there, I'd rather know." The pry bar slid carefully into the narrow crack beside the loose stone. The mortar crumbled easier than expected. Old, brittle, dust spilled across the hearth floor. Ranger stepped backward uneasily. Then the stone shifted. A cold draft whispered out from the darkness behind it. Maggie shivered immediately. "That's not creepy at all." Caleb ignored her. He braced himself and pulled harder. The stone finally broke free with a grinding scrape. Behind it sat darkness and iron. A small black metal box had been hidden inside the chimney foundation itself. The box looked ancient. Rusted edges, heavy hinges, no lock. Caleb carefully slid it free while soot rained onto the floor around him. The metal felt ice cold in his hands. Ranger sniffed the box once, then stopped growling entirely. That changed everything. Whatever terrified the dog before, it wasn't this. Maggie crouched beside Caleb now, flashlight illuminating the object between them. "Well," she whispered, "you officially bought yourself a haunted treasure chest." Caleb lifted the lid slowly. The hinges groaned softly. Inside lay 3 objects wrapped in oilcloth preserved by decades of darkness and dry stone. A revolver, several journals tied together with leather cord, and a thick leather-bound ledger. The revolver sat on top. Civil War era by the look of it. Long barrel, walnut grip, still remarkably preserved. Caleb lifted it carefully, heavy, balanced. The weapon of a man who once expected danger constantly, like him. Maggie examined it quietly. "That thing belongs in a museum." Caleb checked the cylinder automatically. Loaded. 5 rounds still rested inside. Neither spoke for a moment after that. The idea unsettled both of them. Someone had hidden a loaded weapon inside the hearth and never returned for it. Outside, snow slammed against the windows harder than ever. The mountains had disappeared completely beneath white fury. Maggie looked toward the storm uneasily. "You're not getting out of here today." "Wasn't planning to." She nodded once, then pointed toward the journals. "You gonna open those?" Caleb set the revolver aside and untied the leather cord. The journals smelled faintly of smoke and old paper. The first pages were written in faded brown ink. Careful handwriting. Elegant. Maggie leaned closer while Caleb turned pages slowly. Lists of supplies, traveler names, weather notes, mountain conditions. Then Caleb found the ledger, larger than the journals. He opened it carefully. The first page read, Mercy House Guest Register, established October 1862. Below it sat rows of handwritten names, travelers, stagecoach drivers, families heading west, soldiers, miners, hunters, page after page, year after year, an entire forgotten world preserved beneath the fireplace. Caleb turned another page, and another. Then something strange appeared. Beside several guest names, written in darker ink, were two words repeated over and over. Sheltered below. Maggie frowned. What does that mean? Caleb kept reading silently. January 1871. 3 travelers from Silverton. Storm closed North Pass. Sheltered below. December 1880. Widow and 2 children. Fever. Sheltered below. February 1883. 7 miners. Avalanche danger. Sheltered below. The phrase appeared dozens of times, maybe hundreds. Always during storms, always during winter. Ranger had moved closer now, staring at the open ledger as if he understood something neither human could see yet. Maggie wrapped her coat tighter. I don't like that wording. Why? Because it sounds permanent. The fire snapped sharply inside the hearth. All 3 looked toward it instantly. Caleb's pulse jumped before he could stop it. Again, the war flashed behind his eyes. Explosions, dust clouds, buildings collapsing. He heard screaming for half a second. Then the inn returned around him. Maggie noticed the distant look immediately. Noticed how his breathing changed. You okay? Caleb nodded automatically. The lie came fast now. Professional. Practiced. Fine. But his hands tightened around the ledger unconsciously. Maggie studied him several seconds before quietly changing the subject. My husband used to look like that. Caleb glanced up. Army? Marines. She stared into the fire. Afghanistan. Something unspoken passed between them then. Not comfort. Recognition. People who survived certain things often recognized damage in each other instantly. No explanations necessary. Ranger suddenly stood again. His ears lifted toward the ceiling, then toward the cellar door chained beside the hearth. The growl returned quietly. Caleb followed the dog's stare. Cold air still seeped beneath the chained door. The phrase echoed inside his mind now. Sheltered below. Maggie noticed his expression. You think that's connected? Maybe. You planning to open it? Caleb looked at the chains, the rusted padlock, the darkness underneath the door. Then at Ranger. The dog's posture changed completely whenever he faced the cellar. Alert, protective, like he was guarding something instead of fearing it. Caleb closed the ledger slowly. Not today. Maggie seemed relieved. Good instinct. Because the storm outside had become dangerous. Wind screamed across the ridge hard enough to shake the inn itself now. Snow blasted sideways past broken windows. Visibility beyond the porch had vanished entirely. Mercy House sat alone in a white void, trapped. Maggie stood and walked toward the window. If roads stay buried tonight, half the valley's getting stranded. Caleb watched her carefully. You worried about someone? My son. For the first time, emotion cracked her voice slightly. Eli's at my brother's ranch north of town. Caleb nodded slowly. Another parent carrying fear quietly. He understood that too. Maggie checked her watch. If weather eases, I need to head back before dark. It won't ease. She knew he was right. The mountains had a way of deciding things for people. Ranger walked to the front door and sat facing it, still listening, always listening. Caleb rose and added more wood to the fire. The flames climbed higher against the giant stone hearth, throwing golden light across the common room. For a brief moment, the old inn almost looked alive again. Warm, protective, like the building remembered what it used to be. Maggie wandered slowly around the room while Caleb studied the journals more carefully. One entry caught his eye immediately. February 11th, 1884. Storm worsening. Road buried. 4 children arrived near frozen. Fed and sheltered below. God forgive what we must do to keep them alive. Caleb read the final line twice. God forgive what we must do, not what we did. What we must do, present tense, ongoing. The words left a strange heaviness in his chest. Another entry farther ahead. March 2nd, 1886. 3 men from Denver asking questions. Did not trust them. Moved supplies below before dark. Caleb frowned. Supplies? What supplies? Then suddenly Ranger barked sharply toward the front window. Headlights appeared faintly through the blizzard outside. A vehicle climbing the ridge. Maggie moved beside Caleb instantly. Who the hell drives up here in this weather? The headlights stopped near the porch. Truck doors opened. 3 shadowed figures stepped out into the storm. Big men. Heavy coats. Moving with purpose. Not locals stranded accidentally. Ranger's growl deepened immediately. Caleb closed the ledger slowly, then reached for the Civil War revolver lying beside him on the table. Not because he planned to use it, because old instincts never truly died. The footsteps climbed the porch. Wood creaked heavily outside the door. Then came 3 slow knocks against the old entrance of Mercy House. The storm howled behind them, and for the first time since arriving in Black Hollow, Caleb Ryder felt certain the inn's secrets were no longer hidden. The knocking came again. 3 slow thuds against the old oak door. Ranger stood motionless beside Caleb, his growl so low it almost blended with the wind clawing at the walls outside. Maggie instinctively stepped closer to the fireplace, eyes narrowing toward the entrance. The storm had swallowed the entire mountain ridge. No sane person should have been driving through weather like this, especially not at night, especially not up here. Caleb slipped the old revolver into the waistband at the back of his jeans. The cold metal felt strangely natural against his spine. Then he crossed the room and opened the door. Snow exploded inward immediately. 3 men stood on the porch beneath whipping wind and white darkness. All wore heavy winter coats dusted with ice. The tallest stepped forward first, mid-50s maybe. Expensive boots, expensive gloves. The kind of man who looked wrong standing in a mountain storm. His smile appeared practiced. "Evening," he shouted over the wind. "Road's about disappeared out there." Caleb didn't answer right away. The man's eyes moved carefully across the room behind him. The fireplace, the journals, the open ledger on the table. Then finally Ranger. The dog's growl deepened instantly. The stranger noticed. "Friendly dog." "No," Caleb replied flatly. For a brief second, something cold flickered behind the man's smile. Then it vanished. "Well," he said smoothly, "mind if we warm up a minute?" The 2 men behind him looked rougher. Work jackets, heavy shoulders. One carried himself like former security or law enforcement. Caleb recognized the posture immediately. The storm roared harder outside. Maggie quietly stepped beside Caleb. Roads washed out north of the ridge, she said calmly. Nobody's getting back tonight. The tall man studied her, then nodded. Much appreciated. The three men stepped inside. Snow melted instantly off their boots onto the old wooden floor. Ranger backed away toward Caleb slowly, but never stopped staring. Not nervous, evaluating. The tall man removed his gloves carefully. Name's Gavin Pierce. Caleb recognized the name immediately. Even living mostly alone these past few years, he had still seen enough news to know Pierce Development Group. Mining contracts, resorts, land acquisitions, money, lots of it. What brings a Denver businessman to Black Hollow during a blizzard? Maggie asked. Pierce smiled faintly. Opportunity. The answer lingered strangely in the room. Caleb shut the door against the storm. Pierce walked slowly toward the fireplace, studying the massive stone hearth with open fascination now. Well, I'll be damned, he murmured softly. Mercy House. You know this place? Caleb asked. Pierce glanced over his shoulder. Everybody around here knows this place. One of the larger men moved closer to the hearthstones. Ranger barked sharply at him immediately. The man stopped. Pierce raised a calming hand. It's okay, boy. But Ranger's ears flattened hard. The dog moved directly between the stranger and the loose hearthstone Caleb had removed earlier, protecting it. Caleb noticed. So did Pierce. The businessman's eyes narrowed almost invisibly. Interesting. Maggie crossed her arms. You didn't answer the question. Pierce smiled again. I'm looking at old mining properties north of Silverton. In a blizzard? Timing's timing. The answer sounded wrong. Caleb watched the two larger men carefully now. Neither looked cold. Neither looked stranded. Both kept subtly scanning the room. Security sweep behavior. Military or trained. The old instincts inside Caleb woke fully now. Threat recognition. Pattern analysis. The room changed around him instantly. Exits, weapons, angles, distance to cover. He hated when his mind did this, because it meant part of him was always still at war. Pierce wandered closer to the fireplace again. Then he noticed the ledger openly. His expression changed slightly. Interest. Real interest. What's this? Guest records, Caleb answered. Pierce extended a hand casually. Mind? Caleb didn't move. Something passed silently between the two men. A pressure, a challenge. Then Caleb finally slid the ledger toward him. Pierce opened it carefully. The businessman's calm demeanor cracked for just 1 second as he read the repeated phrase, sheltered below. There. That reaction. Small, fast, but real. Caleb saw it instantly. Pierce recovered quickly and closed the book again. Interesting place you bought yourself. For $10. Pierce looked up slowly. You paid $10 for Mercy House? That a problem? Pierce smiled again, though this one carried less warmth. No problem at all. But his eyes drifted toward the cellar door chained beside the hearth. And Caleb understood something immediately. This man hadn't arrived here by accident. Not during a storm like this. Not tonight. Not after the hearth compartment had been opened. Ranger suddenly moved closer to Caleb's leg. Alert signal. The dog's stare locked onto the larger man standing nearest the window. The man shifted awkwardly. Caleb noticed the slight bulge beneath the coat instantly. Weapon. Probably handgun. Pierce followed Caleb's gaze, then sighed softly. Relax. Mountains get unpredictable. My guys carry protection. My dog doesn't like armed strangers. Pierce's smile disappeared entirely now. Well, your dog doesn't know me. No, Caleb replied quietly. He usually reads people pretty well. Silence settled over the inn. The fire cracked loudly between them. Then Maggie stepped forward suddenly. You boys hungry? The question broke the tension slightly. Pierce chuckled. You offering? There's canned soup and coffee. That's about it. Sounds wonderful. Within minutes, the atmosphere shifted outwardly calmer, but only outwardly. Maggie heated soup over the hearth while the storm battered Mercy House harder than ever. Wind screamed down the chimney. Snow piled thick against the windows. The inn felt isolated from the entire world. Caleb stayed mostly silent, watching, listening. Ranger remained beside him constantly. Pierce sat near the fire, studying the room like a man revisiting a memory. You know, he said eventually, my grandfather used to tell stories about this place. Maggie glanced up. What kind of stories? Pierce leaned back in the chair. Travelers surviving blizzards, missing miners, army payrolls disappearing during the silver boom. The larger man near the window smirked faintly. Pierce ignored him. They called this road the Storm Road once. Avalanches buried entire wagon trains up here. Caleb stared into the fire. My father used to say, mountains decide who survives. Pierce studied him carefully. Your father military too? No. What was he? Caleb hesitated. The answer surprised him when it came. Builder. He hadn't spoken about his father in years. Walter Ryder had built cabins, fireplaces, barns, anything made from wood and stone. Hard man, heavy drinker, rough hands that always smelled like sawdust and smoke, but he had understood shelter. Caleb remembered one winter storm in Wyoming when he was maybe 10 years old. Snow trapped a stranded family near their property. Walter brought them inside without hesitation, fed them, warmed them. Caleb remembered his father kneeling beside the fireplace afterwards saying, a fire only matters if somebody cold can sit beside it. At the time, Caleb hadn't understood the lesson. Now, sitting inside Mercy House with strangers trapped by a blizzard around an old hearth, he finally did. The wind suddenly slammed the building so hard, the windows rattled violently. Maggie flinched. Ranger rose immediately. Then the power from Pierce's truck lights outside died completely. Darkness swallowed the windows. Pierce cursed softly. Battery's gone. You're not leaving tonight, Maggie said. Pierce nodded reluctantly. Looks that way. One of his men shifted uneasily. We should keep moving before the pass closes completely. Pierce snapped a sharp glance at him. No. The word carried authority instantly. The man shut up. Caleb noticed. Definitely not simple employees. Then Ranger walked slowly toward the chained cellar door again. The dog sniffed once, then sat directly in front of it. Watching. Guarding. Pierce's eyes followed him carefully. What's down there? Caleb answered honestly. Don't know yet. The businessman smiled faintly. I think maybe you do. Caleb's gaze hardened. You got a reason for being interested in my cellar? Before Pierce could answer, headlights appeared faintly through the storm outside again. Another vehicle. Maggie frowned. Who else would be climbing this mountain tonight? The headlights moved slowly through the whiteout, before finally stopping near the inn. An old pickup truck. A single man climbed out wearing a thick shearling coat and carrying a lantern. Even through the snow, Caleb could see age in the man's posture. The newcomer stepped onto the porch and opened the door without knocking. Cold air burst inside again. The old man stopped immediately when he saw Pierce. Well, he muttered darkly, ain't this interesting? Pierce stood slowly. Walter Boone. The old miner removed snow from his beard while staring directly at Pierce. You got no business up here tonight. Pierce's expression cooled. I could say the same. Walter ignored him completely and looked toward Caleb instead. You the seal bought Mercy House? Caleb nodded once. Walter's eyes drifted toward the hearth, then toward Ranger sitting guard beside the cellar door. The old man went pale instantly. "Lord help us," he whispered. Maggie frowned. "What?" Walter stared directly at Caleb now. "Your dog knows." The room fell silent again. Even Pierce stopped moving. Caleb took one slow step forward. "Knows what?" Walter looked toward the chained cellar door, then back toward the storm outside. His weathered face tightened with something close to fear. "Mercy House ain't haunted," he said quietly. "It's hiding something." The fire cracked violently, and beneath the floorboards of the old inn, something heavy shifted underground. The sound rolled softly through Mercy House like distant thunder beneath stone. Every person in the room heard it. Ranger sprang to his feet instantly. The Belgian Malinois barked once, sharp, explosive, then rushed toward the chained cellar door beside the hearth. His claws scraped hard against the warped floorboards as he sniffed furiously at the crack beneath the door. Walter Boone went pale. Pierce didn't. That disturbed Caleb more than anything. The wealthy developer stood perfectly still beside the fire, eyes fixed on the cellar entrance with a strange calmness that didn't match the moment. Like he had expected this. Maggie noticed it too. Her voice came low. "What the hell was that?" Walter removed his gloves slowly, weathered hands trembling slightly from age and cold. "The mountain moves sometimes," he muttered. But nobody believed him, especially not Ranger. The dog barked again and planted himself directly in front of the chained door, guarding it. Pierce finally stepped closer. "You should open it." Caleb looked at him sharply. "You seem real interested in my basement." Pierce smiled faintly. "Curiosity." Funny timing. The larger man beside Pierce shifted uncomfortably. Outside, the storm hammered the ridge with terrifying force now. Wind shrieked down the chimney while snow blasted the windows hard enough to shake the glass. Mercy House felt cut off from the world. Buried. Walter stared into the fire several seconds before speaking again. "My grandfather used to talk about this place." Pierce sighed quietly, almost irritated. "Walter!" "No," the old miner snapped suddenly. "You don't get to silence this anymore." The room fell still. Caleb watched both men carefully now. There was history here. Bad history. Walter pointed toward the cellar. "Back during the Silver Years, folks disappeared up here." "People disappear in mountains," Pierce replied coldly. Walter ignored him. "My grandfather said Mercy House sheltered people during storms. Travelers, families, miners." He swallowed hard. "But he also said men came looking for something hidden beneath this inn." Ranger growled louder. Pierce's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Caleb noticed. The old seal in him had fully awakened now. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't coincidence. Not the storm, not Pierce arriving tonight, not the cellar. Something connected all of it. Maggie folded her arms. "You know what's down there, don't you?" Pierce chuckled softly. "If I did, do you think I'd be standing here talking about it?" Walter stared at him bitterly. "You've been buying half the valley trying to find it." That finally broke Pierce's calm. Only slightly. But enough. Caleb saw the businessman's eyes harden. "Careful, Walter." "Or what?" The storm growled outside like a living thing. Then suddenly, crack! The entire inn shuddered violently. Dust rained from the ceiling beams. Maggie stumbled sideways. Ranger barked furiously. A second later came the deep roar of shifting snow somewhere beyond the ridge. Avalanche. The sound rolled through the mountains endlessly. Then silence returned. Dead silence. Walter looked toward the windows grimly. Pass is gone now. Pierce cursed under his breath. Nobody was leaving Mercy House tonight. Caleb crossed slowly toward the chained cellar door. Ranger stepped aside immediately. The dog's eyes never left the darkness beneath the frame. Caleb crouched. The chains looked ancient, the lock even older. But something bothered him immediately. The rust around the latch looked disturbed. Recent scratches, recent movement. Someone had opened this door before. Not years ago, recently. Caleb stood slowly. "Who's been down there?" Nobody answered. Pierce looked away first. That told Caleb enough. Without another word, Caleb grabbed the fireplace poker leaning beside the hearth and wedged it through the chain links. Maggie stepped closer instantly. "You sure?" "No." Then he pulled hard. The old metal groaned, once, twice, then snapped violently apart. The sound echoed through the inn. Ranger backed away slightly, muscles tense. Caleb removed the broken chains carefully and wrapped his hand around the iron handle. Cold, ice cold. He pulled. The cellar door opened inward with a long wooden creak. Darkness breathed out immediately. Cold underground air rolled into the room, carrying the smell of earth, stone, and something older. Something sealed away. The flashlight beam revealed narrow stone steps descending beneath the inn. Walter crossed himself quietly. Pierce stepped forward. Caleb blocked him instantly. "I go first." Pierce smiled faintly. "Of course." Ranger moved beside Caleb immediately as they descended together into the darkness. The stone staircase twisted downward beneath Mercy House. Each step carried them deeper into cold silence. The sounds upstairs faded behind them until only boots against stone remained. The cellar finally opened beneath the inn. Massive. Older than the building above somehow. Stone walls curved beneath timber supports blackened with age. Dust covered everything. Old shelves lined the walls holding shattered jars and rusted tools. Wooden barrels collapsed inward from rot. But something else stood out immediately. The cellar was too large. Far too large. It stretched deeper beneath the inn than the building itself. Like part of it continued underground beyond visible walls. Ranger moved ahead carefully, sniffing, tracking. Then he stopped beside the far wall and growled softly. Caleb swept the flashlight across the stone. Fresh scrape marks. A section of shelving had been moved recently. Pierce appeared behind them now despite Caleb's warning. His two men followed close. Maggie and Walter stayed near the stairs. Caleb stepped toward the shelving slowly. The old floor beneath his boots changed suddenly. Hollow. He froze. Ranger barked sharply. Caleb crouched immediately and brushed dirt aside with his glove. Wood. Hidden beneath layers of dust and stone. A trapdoor. Walter whispered something under his breath upstairs. Pierce stepped closer. "There it is." Caleb looked up instantly. "You knew." Pierce smiled thinly. "I knew there were stories." The larger man beside him pulled a flashlight from his coat. Definitely not stranded travelers. Caleb rose slowly. "What exactly are you looking for?" Pierce studied him several seconds before answering. "History." "Bull." Silence. Then Pierce finally spoke honestly. "Federal payroll gold disappeared in these mountains in 1883. Walter muttered bitterly. "There it is." Pierce ignored him. 3 soldiers vanished escorting it. No bodies ever recovered. His eyes drifted toward the trapdoor. "People have been searching ever since." Maggie looked stunned. "You think it's under the inn?" Pierce smiled. "I think somebody built Mercy House for more than shelter." Caleb stared at the hidden door beneath his feet. The old journals flashed through his mind again. Sheltered below. Moved supplies below. God forgive what we must do. Not treasure hunters. Protectors. Something about the story felt wrong. Ranger suddenly began scratching violently at the trapdoor itself. Not aggressive. Urgent. Caleb knelt and grabbed the iron ring buried beneath dust. The wood felt ancient, but solid. He pulled. The hidden door groaned upward. A narrow tunnel descended beneath the cellar into absolute darkness. Cold air rushed upward hard enough to extinguish one of the lanterns near the stairs. Maggie stepped backward immediately. "Oh my God!" The tunnel walls were reinforced with old timber beams disappearing into blackness beneath the mountain itself. Ranger barked once, then started down without hesitation. "Ranger!" The dog ignored him. Caleb cursed softly and grabbed the flashlight. Pierce moved instantly. "We're coming too." "No, you're not." One of Pierce's men stepped forward aggressively. Bad decision. Caleb moved before thought. Fast, violent, pure muscle memory. He twisted the man's wrist, slammed him hard against the stone wall, and stripped the handgun from beneath the coat in one fluid motion. The entire cellar froze. Even Pierce looked surprised. Caleb held the weapon low and steady now, not threatening. Professional. Controlled. The old operator buried inside him had surfaced completely. "Here's what's going to happen," Caleb said quietly. "Nobody follows me down there." The second man started to move. Ranger exploded backward from the tunnel entrance instantly, snarling so savagely the man froze in place. The dog stood protectively beside Caleb again. "Ready." Pierce slowly raised both hands. "Easy." Caleb tossed the confiscated handgun across the cellar floor toward Walter. The old miner caught it awkwardly. "Watch them." Walter nodded grimly. Then Caleb turned toward the tunnel. Ranger moved beside him immediately. The flashlight beam disappeared into endless underground darkness. Caleb looked at Maggie once. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes, don't say that." Their eyes met briefly. Something unspoken passed there. Then Caleb descended into the tunnel with Ranger beside him. The darkness swallowed them quickly. The tunnel narrowed deeper beneath the mountain. Old beams creaked overhead. Water dripped somewhere far away. The air smelled untouched, forgotten. Ranger moved carefully ahead, nose low, tracking something invisible. Then Caleb saw it. Footprints. Fresh. Not old mining tracks. Recent boot prints leading deeper underground. Someone else had already been here. Suddenly the tunnel widened into a larger chamber. Caleb swept the flashlight slowly across the darkness and stopped breathing. Bunk frames. Rows of them. Dozens. Old blankets stacked carefully in corners. Lantern hooks. Shelves for food storage. This wasn't a hiding place. It was a shelter. A refuge built beneath the mountain. Then Ranger barked sharply at the far wall. Caleb turned. An iron door stood partially buried beneath collapsed rock. And beside it, a human skeleton sat slumped against the stone. Still wrapped in the tattered remains of an army winter coat. The flashlight trembled slightly in Caleb's hand. Then the mountain groaned. A deep cracking roar exploded above them. Ranger lunged instantly. The tunnel ceiling collapsed behind them in a violent avalanche of rock and timber. Darkness swallowed everything. The roar hit Caleb like an explosion. Stone shattered against the tunnel walls. Dust blasted through the underground chamber in choking waves, while massive beams snapped overhead like rifle fire. Ranger slammed into Caleb hard. The impact knocked him sideways just as a timber crashed where he had been standing a second earlier. Then came silence. Absolute. Heavy. The flashlight had flown from Caleb's hand during the collapse. Somewhere nearby, metal rolled against stone before disappearing into the dark. Caleb lay still for 2 seconds. 3. Training took over immediately. Check injuries. Breathe. Move. He pushed himself upright slowly, coughing through thick dust that coated the air like smoke after a firefight. Pain burned along his left shoulder, where falling debris had clipped him. Nothing broken. Probably. "Ranger!" The dog barked instantly somewhere close. Relief hit Caleb harder than expected. A second later, Ranger emerged through the dust cloud, ears back, body tense but unharmed. The Malinois pressed against Caleb immediately, checking him the same way he always had after combat. "I'm good," Caleb rasped. The dog didn't believe him. Dust drifted slowly through the narrow flashlight beam, now glowing weakly several feet away. Caleb crawled toward it and picked it up carefully. The tunnel behind them was gone, buried completely beneath tons of rock and shattered timber. No light, no exit, only solid collapse. Caleb stared at it several seconds without speaking. Then the reality settled in. Trapped. Underground. His breathing changed instantly. Fast. Sharp. His chest tightened violently. Not here. Not underground. Not again. The chamber blurred around him suddenly as another memory ripped loose inside his head. Concrete dust. Collapsed buildings overseas, screaming beneath rubble. Hands digging through shattered stone while radio chatter screamed through static. Caleb staggered backward hard against the tunnel wall. His pulse exploded. No air. No space. The underground chamber seemed to shrink around him. Ranger barked sharply. Once, twice, grounding command. The dog rushed forward and shoved his head beneath Caleb's trembling hand. "Focus here. Not there." Caleb squeezed his eyes shut hard. "Not real," he whispered hoarsely. The panic clawed at him anyway. Claustrophobia had gotten worse after Syria. Buried civilians, collapsed schools, too many bodies pulled from too much concrete. Underground darkness did something to him now. Something ugly. Ranger stayed pressed firmly against him until the shaking slowly passed. Minute by minute. Breath by breath. Finally, Caleb leaned his head back against cold stone and exhaled slowly. The chamber returned around him. Tunnel, dust, darkness. The skeleton still sitting against the far wall beneath the iron door. Ranger whined softly now, calmer. "Good boy," Caleb whispered. The words came rough. He hated losing control, especially in front of the dog, because Ranger remembered those places too. The flashlight beam swept carefully across the underground chamber. The shelter looked far larger now that the dust had settled. Bunk frames lined both walls, not temporary sleeping spaces, but organized sheltering. Handmade shelves still held rusted cans and shattered jars beneath thick layers of dust. Blankets, lanterns, water barrels. Someone had prepared this place carefully. To survive. Caleb moved slowly toward the skeleton near the iron door. The army coat had mostly rotted away, but enough remained to reveal faded brass buttons beneath the dust. Civil War era, maybe? No. Later. 1880s, most likely. The bones sat upright with eerie stillness, one skeletal hand resting against a rusted metal box beside the body. Ranger sniffed carefully at the remains, then backed away respectfully. Even now, the dog understood death. Caleb crouched slowly. The metal box looked military, heavy steel, corroded edges. He opened it carefully. Inside lay old letters bundled with twine and wrapped in oilcloth, perfectly preserved. His pulse slowed again. Not treasure. Records. History. Outside the collapsed tunnel, muffled voices echoed faintly through the debris. Maggie. Walter. Pierce. They were digging. Caleb grabbed the letters quickly and stuffed them inside his jacket. Something about Pierce bothered him more every minute. The man knew too much already. Ranger suddenly barked toward the iron door behind the skeleton. Caleb turned the flashlight toward it. The door sat partially buried beneath rockfall, but strange symbols had been carved into the metal surface decades earlier. Not military, not mining marks. Names. Dozens of names. Some scratched deeply into the iron by hand. Others faded nearly invisible with time. Caleb stepped closer. Many were foreign, Italian, Polish, Chinese, Immigrant names. Families, maybe. The final name carved near the center stood out immediately. Elias Mercy, 1884. Below it, someone had carved, "No one left outside." Caleb stared at the words quietly. Something tightened deep in his chest. His father's voice echoed again from childhood. A fire only matters if somebody cold can sit beside it. This place wasn't built to hide gold. It was built to protect people. Ranger barked again toward the collapse. The digging outside had grown louder. Caleb moved carefully toward the buried tunnel and shouted, "Maggie!" Her voice answered faintly through stone. "Caleb!" Relief flooded through him. "We're here! We're trying to clear it!" Walter's voice followed. "Mountain's unstable. Gotta move careful." Then came another voice. "Pierce, you hurt?" Caleb didn't answer him. Instead, he turned back toward the underground shelter. The flashlight revealed something else now. Fresh footprints, boot prints in the dust. Modern, recent. Someone had been inside this chamber before tonight. Ranger sniffed them immediately, then growled low. Not old scent. Recent scent. Caleb followed the tracks slowly. They led deeper beyond the buried iron door where darkness continued beneath the mountain. The underground system stretched farther than he first realized, farther than any simple shelter should. Then his flashlight caught movement. Tiny. Fast. A rat disappeared through broken beams deeper inside the tunnel network. But behind the animal, something reflected light. Metal. Caleb stepped carefully over debris and aimed the flashlight lower. A second skeleton lay half-buried beneath collapsed timbers. This one smaller. No military coat. No weapon. Only bones curled tightly around an old leather satchel. Ranger whined softly. Caleb crouched beside the remains carefully. The satchel crumbled almost instantly when touched, but inside rested several preserved photographs protected by folded cloth. Families, children, miners standing beside snow-covered cabins. One photo showed a group gathered outside Mercy House itself, sometime in the 1880s. Men, women, children. And standing at the center, a tall, bearded man beside the inn's hearth carrying a ladle like a weapon against winter. Written beneath the image in faded ink, Elias Mercy, Winter Shelter, 1884. Caleb stared at the photograph for a long moment, stared at Tone. Then another panic tremor rolled through the mountain overhead. Dust rained down again. Ranger barked sharply toward the collapse. Maggie's voice echoed louder now. "Caleb, we almost got through!" Hope surged briefly. Then another sound reached them. Engines. Multiple engines. Even through tons of stone, Caleb recognized it instantly. Vehicles climbing the ridge above Mercy House. Pierce heard them too. His muffled voice changed immediately. "They're here," Walter shouted angrily. "You brought people up here?" No answer. Caleb's stomach tightened. Ranger's ears flattened hard. Outside the collapsed tunnel, voices erupted in sudden argument. Then came the unmistakable metallic sound of a handgun being chambered. Caleb went perfectly still. Pierce. The businessman had backup arriving, and now Caleb understood the truth. The storm hadn't trapped Gavin Pierce at Mercy House. He had come here intentionally, for whatever lay hidden beneath the inn. Ranger barked furiously toward the collapse. Then suddenly the buried rubble shifted. A narrow opening cracked through the stones. Light spilled faintly into the chamber. Maggie's terrified face appeared through drifting dust. "Caleb!" Relief flooded her eyes instantly, but Caleb saw something else behind her. Fear. Real fear. "Pierce pulled a gun on Walter," she whispered urgently. "You need to move now." Ranger growled violently. Above them, the mountain wind screamed across Mercy House. And somewhere out in the blizzard, more men were coming, The wind outside Mercy House screamed like a living thing. Snow hammered the mountainside hard enough to erase the road entirely. But through the narrow crack in the collapsed tunnel, Caleb could still hear engines grinding upward through the storm. Heavy trucks, more than one. Ranger's growl deepened beside him. Maggie reached through the opening and grabbed Caleb's arm. "You need to move. Right now." Dust drifted between them while the mountain groaned overhead. Caleb glanced once toward the deeper darkness behind him. The hidden shelter, the skeletons, the iron door with names carved into it. Then back toward Maggie. "How bad?" "Pierce brought armed men." Not surprising. But hearing it made something inside Caleb settle cold and hard. The old instincts fully returned now. Threat confirmed. Unknown enemy strength. Civilian danger present. Protect the position. Protect the people. Ranger barked sharply. Caleb squeezed through the narrow opening while Maggie helped pull debris aside from above. The tunnel collapse scraped hard against his injured shoulder, sending pain down his arm. The moment he emerged into the cellar, he saw the tension instantly. Walter Boone stood near the stairs, holding the confiscated handgun awkwardly in both hands. Pierce faced him calmly from across the room. But the second armed man now held a pistol openly beneath his coat. The mask had come off. The moment Caleb appeared, Pierce smiled faintly. "There he is." Caleb stepped fully into the cellar, Ranger immediately at his side. The dog's teeth showed the second he saw the drawn weapon. Walter looked furious. "You used the storm to box us in here." Pierce ignored him completely, his eyes fixed on Caleb instead. "You found something." Not a question. Caleb said nothing. That answer told Pierce enough. The businessman's expression sharpened immediately. "Move aside," he said quietly. "No." Pierce sighed softly, almost disappointed. "I was hoping we could handle this like adults." Caleb took one slow step forward. "You brought armed men into a mountain storm over a 100-year-old tunnel." Pierce's eyes hardened. "You have no idea what's down there." "Neither do you." For the first time, real irritation cracked through Pierce's smooth demeanor. "My family has spent 30 years trying to locate the Mercy cache." Walter spat onto the stone floor. "Blood money." Pierce rounded on him sharply. "Do you know what's buried beneath this valley?" "Enough to know greedy men keep killing for it." The wind above them roared violently through the inn. Then came another sound. Truck doors slamming outside. More men arriving. Maggie went pale. Pierce smiled thinly. "Looks like my ride made it." Caleb's mind worked instantly now. Too many hostiles, limited exits, civilians trapped, unknown terrain, classic containment situation. Ranger pressed close beside his leg, waiting for command. The dog understood tension before words ever came. One of Pierce's men moved toward the tunnel opening. "Boss, this collapse isn't stable." "Then dig carefully." Caleb blocked the path instantly. The armed man raised his pistol slightly. Big mistake. Ranger exploded forward with terrifying speed. The Malinois slammed into the man's chest before the weapon fully cleared his coat. The attacker crashed backward against the cellar wall with a scream as Ranger's teeth locked onto his forearm. The pistol clattered across stone. Chaos erupted instantly. Pierce shouted. Walter raised the handgun shakily. Maggie stumbled backward toward the stairs. Caleb moved like the years between war and now had vanished completely. Fast, controlled, violent. He drove his shoulder into the second man, smashing him into the shelving hard enough to collapse rotten wood everywhere. Dust exploded into the air while Ranger pinned the first attacker helplessly against the floor. "Ranger, hold!" The dog obeyed instantly, but kept snarling inches from the man's throat. Pierce backed toward the stairs, furious now. "You have any idea what you're interfering with?" Caleb grabbed the dropped pistol and pointed it low. "You first." For one long second, nobody moved, only the storm. Only Ranger growling in the dark cellar. Then footsteps thundered across the porch upstairs. More men entering Mercy House. Pierce smiled coldly. "You're outnumbered." Caleb already knew that. But numbers meant less in confined terrain, especially underground. Walter looked toward the stairs in panic. "They can't find that tunnel." Pierce turned sharply. "Oh, they absolutely can." Then suddenly, the old miner snapped. 30 years of bitterness exploded out of him all at once. "You son of a bitch!" Walter stepped forward, shaking with rage. "My grandfather died trying to protect this place from men like your father." Silence. Even Pierce stopped moving. Caleb watched both men carefully. There it was, the real history. Walter pointed toward the buried tunnel. "Your family knew exactly what Mercy House was." Pierce's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "The hell I don't." Walter's voice cracked with age and fury. "The Mercies used that gold to keep people alive through the famine winters. Your father called them thieves because he wanted the money back." Maggie stared between them. "What gold?" Walter looked at her sadly. "In 1883, the Army sent payroll shipments through these mountains to keep the mining camps running." He pointed downward beneath the inn. "But folks were starving. Storms buried whole towns. Elias Mercy started hiding families down there instead of letting them freeze." Pierce cut in coldly. "He stole federal property." "He saved people." The old miner's voice echoed through the cellar. "Your father spent years hunting those tunnels trying to recover gold that fed starving children." Caleb's grip tightened around the pistol. The pieces finally locked together. Sheltered below. The hidden refuge. The names carved into the iron door. Mercy House hadn't hidden criminals. It had hidden survivors. Then footsteps pounded heavily overhead again. Voices shouted through the inn. One of Pierce's new arrivals yelled down the cellar stairs. "Boss, we got company coming up the ridge." Pierce frowned sharply. "What company?" "County trucks, maybe. Hard to see in the storm." Walter smirked faintly. "Probably folks wondering why half of Denver drove into a blizzard." Pierce looked furious now. Time pressure. Good. That made men careless. Caleb saw it immediately. Ranger suddenly released the pinned attacker and trotted toward the tunnel collapse again, barking sharply. Not aggression. Alert. The dog had found something. Caleb followed quickly. Fresh air flowed faintly through a narrow crack deeper in the collapsed stone. Another passage. Ranger sniffed hard, tail rigid. "There's another way through," Caleb muttered. Walter limped closer immediately. The old miner's eyes widened. "Dear God." "What?" Walter pointed toward the airflow. "That's old mining ventilation." Pierce heard him too. His face changed instantly. Excitement. Greed. "There's another chamber." He stepped toward Caleb carefully. "Listen to me. Whatever's down there belongs to history." Caleb looked at him coldly. "You mean money?" Pierce lowered his voice. "You have no idea how valuable this is." That confirmed everything. Not history, not preservation, profit. Caleb had seen men like him before overseas. Men who wrapped greed in words like progress and legacy. Meanwhile, real people got buried underneath. Ranger barked harder at the crack in the collapse, then suddenly started digging frantically. Stone shifted. Cold air burst stronger through the opening, and from somewhere deeper beneath the mountain came the faint sound of rushing water. Walter's face drained pale. "The lower tunnels." Pierce whispered almost reverently, "We found it." Then the entire inn shook violently overhead. Everyone froze. A deafening roar rolled through the mountain. Not avalanche this time. Something closer. The ceiling above the cellar groaned hard. Dust exploded downward. Maggie looked upward in horror. "The hearth!" Another crack split through the stone foundation above them. The old chimney was shifting. centuries of weight beginning to move. Caleb's combat instincts fired instantly. "Everybody out!" No one argued. Even Pierce understood. The cellar erupted into motion. Walter scrambled for the stairs. Maggie grabbed medical bags. Pierce shouted at his men. Ranger stayed glued beside Caleb while the mountain groaned around them like an animal waking beneath the snow. Then Caleb heard it. A child crying upstairs. He froze. Maggie turned instantly. "My God!" Another voice shouted through the storm above. Families. Stranded travelers. People had reached Mercy House seeking shelter during the blizzard. Exactly like the old stories. And suddenly, Caleb realized the terrible truth. The inn was becoming what it had always been. A refuge during the storm. But now the mountain itself was beginning to collapse around it. The old chimney groaned overhead like a wounded tree bending in the wind. Dust drifted through the cellar while everyone scrambled toward the stairs. Ranger barked sharply beside Caleb, ears pinned back, every instinct screaming danger. Another crack split through the ceiling above them. Stone shifted. Somewhere upstairs, glass shattered violently. Then came another sound. Voices. Terrified voices. Families had reached Mercy House. Caleb hit the cellar stairs 2 at a time. The moment he burst into the common room, chaos slammed into him like a wave. Snow blew through the open front door in thick white gusts. 3 vehicles sat buried outside near the porch. An overturned pickup, a county road truck, and an old yellow school bus half sideways in the drift. People crowded inside the inn. Freezing people. A mother clutching 2 crying children beneath blankets. An elderly couple shaking beside the wall. 2 highway workers dragging in boxes of emergency supplies. A teenage boy with blood running down one side of his face. The room smelled of snow, fear, diesel fuel, and wet wool. And at the center of it all stood the giant hearth of Mercy House. Cold. Dark. Waiting. Caleb froze for half a second. The old journals flashed through his mind again. Sheltered below, no one left outside. The inn had seen this before. Storm after storm, generation after generation. The mountain swallowed travelers. Mercy House kept them alive. Another violent gust slammed against the building. One of the women cried out as the lights from the county truck outside finally died completely. Darkness swallowed the valley. Only moonlight and the weak glow of Caleb's lantern remained. Maggie reached the top of the stairs behind him. "Oh God!" Walter Boone moved toward the frightened families immediately. "You're safe now," the old miner called over the storm. "Everybody get away from the windows." Pierce emerged from the cellar slower than the others. His men followed silently. But Caleb noticed something important immediately. Pierce wasn't looking at the people. He was looking at the hearth. At the cellar door. Still thinking about the tunnels. Even now. Caleb stepped directly into his path. "Not tonight." Pierce's jaw tightened. "People are going to die if that chimney collapses." "Then help keep them alive." The 2 men stared at each other across the roaring storm. Then Ranger suddenly barked toward the front entrance. More headlights appeared faintly through the whiteout. Another vehicle. The school bus driver stumbled through the doorway next. Young guy, maybe 30, face pale from cold. "They said this place was abandoned," he gasped. "Road disappeared. We almost went into the ravine." "How many kids?" Maggie asked instantly. 12. Caleb looked outside through the storm. The bus sat crooked near the ridgeline, half buried already. Snow was climbing fast. Too fast. Then he saw movement inside the bus windows. Children. Still trapped. Caleb's body reacted before thought. "Ranger!" The Malinois sprang instantly to his side. Maggie grabbed Caleb's arm. "You can barely see out there. They'll freeze." Another crack thundered through the roof overhead. The mountain wind howled through Mercy House like an animal. Caleb looked toward the massive hearth, then toward the stack of old firewood he had gathered the day before. Decision made. "You!" he barked toward Pierce's men. "Move those tables!" The larger man frowned. "What? You want people alive? Move!" Something in Caleb's voice triggered instinctive obedience, military command presence. Even Pierce's men responded automatically. Within seconds, furniture scraped across the old floor while Caleb crossed to the hearth. The stone structure towered over him now, 6 feet wide, built for feeding dozens, built for surviving storms. Walter limped beside him. "She still draws right," the old miner whispered. Caleb glanced at him. "What?" Walter touched the blackened limestone gently. "My grandfather said this hearth could warm half the valley during blizzards." Caleb grabbed the iron poker beside the fireplace. "Then let's wake her up." The old ash inside the hearth exploded outward as he cleared the firebox. Ranger helped instinctively, barking while Caleb ripped apart old chair legs and dry timber for kindling. Maggie joined him without hesitation. Then something remarkable happened. The stranded travelers started helping too. The old couple carried wood. The road workers broke apart damaged shelves. Even the terrified teenage boy began stacking timber beside the hearth. Fear turned into movement, movement into purpose. Exactly the way survival always worked. Caleb struck the first flame himself. The fire caught slowly at first, then stronger. Then suddenly, the massive stone hearth roared alive for the first time in generations. Orange light exploded across the common room. Warmth rolled outward immediately. People exhaled in relief almost all at once. Even Pierce stared at the fire silently. The ancient limestone absorbed heat greedily, like something remembering its purpose. Walter's eyes glistened faintly in the firelight. "Mercy House," he whispered. Ranger sat beside the flames, watching the room carefully. Not resting. Standing watch. Always standing watch. Then Caleb heard the children crying again outside. The bus. Damn it. He grabbed his coat immediately. Maggie looked up sharply. "Where are you going?" "Bus. You can't even see the road." "I don't need to." Ranger was already beside the door before Caleb finished speaking. The dog knew. Of course he knew. Caleb grabbed a coil of rope hanging beside the wall and tied it around his waist. He handed the other end to Walter. "If we don't come back in 10 minutes..." "You'll come back," Maggie interrupted sharply. Their eyes met briefly. The firelight softened her face for 1 second before another gust rattled the windows violently. Caleb nodded once. Then he opened the door. The blizzard hit like a physical force. Wind nearly knocked him sideways immediately, while snow blinded everything beyond a few feet. Ranger vanished ahead into white darkness, moving low and fast through the storm. Caleb followed the rope line carefully. 1 step, then another. The cold sliced through his lungs instantly. The bus appeared suddenly through the whiteout like a dying ship buried in snow. Children cried inside. The driver had left several trapped during the slide. Caleb climbed aboard through the tilted emergency door. 3 kids remained inside, huddled together beneath seats. One little girl couldn't move her leg, pinned. Fear hit her face the second she saw him. "It's okay," Caleb said calmly. His voice changed automatically around frightened civilians. Steady, controlled, safe. "Hey," he said gently. "You see that dog?" Ranger barked once outside the bus. The little girl nodded shakily. "He never leaves anybody behind." Caleb freed the twisted metal trapping her leg, while the storm screamed around the bus hard enough to rock it dangerously toward the ravine. Then came another sound. Deep, thunderous, avalanche. Somewhere above them. Ranger barked violently. Warning! Caleb's pulse surged. The mountain was moving again. He scooped the injured girl into his arms. "Everybody hold on to me!" The children clung to his coat, while Ranger led them blindly through the whiteout toward Mercy House. The avalanche roar grew louder behind them. Snow exploded through the trees above the ridge. Caleb ran harder. The little girl buried her face against his shoulder, crying softly. Then suddenly warm orange light appeared through the storm. The inn. Mercy House glowing against the mountain like a lighthouse. Walter and Maggie hauled the door open just as Caleb stumbled onto the porch with the children. The avalanche thundered across the ridge behind them seconds later. Snow slammed through the trees where the bus had stood moments before. The entire valley shook. Inside the inn, people stared at Caleb in stunned silence. Ranger stood in the doorway covered in snow, chest heaving hard. The little girl wrapped both arms around Caleb's neck. "You came back," she whispered. For one strange moment, the room disappeared around him. No war, no guilt, no dead civilians he couldn't save. Only warmth, only firelight, only a frightened child alive in his arms. Caleb swallowed hard, then quietly handed her to Maggie. The old seal looked toward the roaring hearth again, and for the first time in years, he did not feel broken. He felt useful. Outside, the blizzard buried the mountains deeper in silence. But inside Mercy House, the fire burned brighter. The giant hearth roared against the storm, throwing waves of orange light across the old common room, while snow buried the mountains outside deeper by the minute. People huddled closer to the warmth instinctively. Children wrapped in blankets. Road workers thawing frozen hands near the flames. The elderly couple asleep against each other beside the stone wall. For the first time since the blizzard began, the room no longer felt panicked. It felt protected. Alive. Exactly what Mercy House had once been. Caleb stood near the fire silently, steam rising from his coat, while melted snow dripped onto the floorboards beneath him. Ranger sat at his side, watching the room with calm intensity, ears twitching toward every movement. Still working. Always working. Maggie crossed the room carrying a mug of coffee. "You're bleeding." Caleb glanced down. The cut on his shoulder from the tunnel collapse had soaked through part of his shirt. "Looks worse than it is." That's what every stubborn man says right before he passes out. Despite everything, Caleb almost smiled. Almost. Maggie handed him the coffee anyway. Their fingers brushed briefly in the firelight. Warm. Human. Normal. It startled him more than the storm, because Caleb Ryder had spent years forgetting what normal felt like. Then Ranger suddenly lifted his head. The dog stared toward the far side of the room, toward the cellar door. His ears rose slowly. A low growl rolled through his chest again. Caleb's entire body reacted instantly. The room faded. Threat focus returned. Pierce noticed too. The businessman sat near the hearth pretending calm, but his eyes sharpened immediately. Walter Boone muttered softly from beside the fire. "He smells something." Ranger stood, then crossed directly to the cellar entrance. Not aggressive, intentional. He sniffed once near the floorboards beside the door, then began scratching furiously at the wall itself. Not the door, the stone beside it. Caleb set down the coffee immediately. The old miner rose slowly. "What is it, boy?" Ranger barked once, hard, then scratched again. The sound echoed through Mercy House. Several of the stranded travelers looked up nervously. One little boy whispered, "Is something down there?" Nobody answered. Caleb grabbed the flashlight from the nearby table and crossed toward the wall. The stone beside the cellar entrance looked ordinary at first glance, but Ranger kept pawing at one specific section near the floorboards. Caleb crouched slowly, ran his fingers along the limestone, then stopped. A draft. Cold air seeped through a crack too narrow to notice before. Interesting. Very interesting. Pierce stood carefully. Move! Caleb ignored him. Ranger barked louder now, claws scraping stone desperately. Maggie knelt beside Caleb. What's he doing? He found airflow. Walter's weathered face tightened instantly. There's another chamber. Pierce stepped closer. You knew about this? The old miner glared at him. I knew the mountain had more tunnels than maps. Caleb swept the flashlight carefully across the crack. Then he saw it. Iron, buried beneath soot and stone. A hidden latch. His pulse slowed instantly. Focus narrowing. The same feeling he used to get before breaching doors overseas. Something hidden. Something waiting. He reached for the old fireplace poker. Pierce moved closer immediately. I'll help. No, Caleb replied sharply. The businessman stopped. That same silent pressure returned between them again. Neither trusted the other now, not even slightly. Caleb wedged the poker into the crack and pulled hard. The old limestone shifted with a grinding groan. Dust spilled across the floor. Then part of the wall moved inward. A hidden stone panel. Gasps spread through the room. Behind the panel lay darkness, and a narrow passage descending beneath Mercy House. Ranger barked sharply and tried to move inside immediately. Caleb grabbed his collar. Easy. Cold air poured from the hidden opening, carrying the smell of wet earth and ancient stone. The passage looked older than the inn itself. Timber supports disappeared downward into blackness beneath the mountain. Walter crossed himself quietly. My grandfather said Elias Mercy built tunnels after the famine winters. Pierce stepped closer, unable to hide his excitement now. This is it. Caleb turned sharply. You keep saying that like you already know what's down there. Pierce smiled faintly. My father spent 20 years searching these mountains. For gold? For proof. Proof of what? Pierce's expression shifted strangely in the firelight. History gets rewritten by whoever survives long enough to tell it. Walter spat angrily onto the floorboards. Your father called Elias Mercy a thief. He stole federal property. He fed starving people. The old miner's voice echoed through the inn hard enough to silence the room again. Walter pointed toward the hidden passage. You know what winter was like up here in 1884? Whole camps buried alive. Children freezing in mining tents. His eyes burned toward Pierce. Elias Mercy used that payroll gold to buy food and medicine. Pierce's jaw tightened. He robbed the army. He saved families. Silence followed. Only the storm outside. Only the fire breathing through the hearth. Caleb looked toward the hidden passage again, then toward the frightened travelers gathered around the fire, the same pattern repeating through time. Storm, shelter, people trying to survive. The mountain never changed. Only the faces did. Ranger whined softly now. Not fear, urgency. The dog wanted Caleb to follow. Maggie noticed it too. He's trying to show you something. Caleb nodded slowly, then looked toward Walter. You know these tunnels? Only stories. That enough to get lost down there? Walter hesitated. Yes. Pierce stepped forward instantly. We need to go now before another collapse seals it. Caleb looked at the civilians filling Mercy House. Children, families, cold, exhausted people finally safe beside the hearth. The protector inside him won over the soldier. No. Pierce blinked. What? We don't split up the shelter during a storm. The businessman's calm finally cracked fully. You don't understand what's down there. Caleb stepped closer. Maybe I understand exactly what's down there. The two men stared at each other across the firelight. Then Ranger suddenly barked violently toward the hidden passage. Everybody turned. A sound echoed faintly upward from below. Metal scraping stone. Exactly the same sound Caleb heard the first night at the hearth. Only louder now. Closer. Maggie whispered, "That's impossible." Ranger growled hard. The dog's posture changed instantly from alert to defensive. Protective. Caleb grabbed the flashlight again. Then another sound drifted upward, water rushing somewhere deep underground. And beneath that, voices. Very faint. Impossible to understand. But human. The room froze completely. Even Pierce looked shaken now. Walter's face went pale beneath the firelight. "No," he whispered softly. "No, no, no." Maggie grabbed Caleb's arm. "You hear that?" He nodded once. The old miner stared toward the passage with visible fear now. "My grandfather used to say, 'Storms wake the mountain.'" Another metallic scrape echoed upward. Closer this time. Ranger barked furiously. Caleb's instincts screamed two things at once: danger and truth. Whatever lay beneath Mercy House, the storm was bringing it closer to the surface. Then suddenly one of the stranded highway workers stumbled toward them. "Hey!" Everyone turned. The man pointed toward the front windows. Lights moved through the blizzard outside. Flashlights. Several. Pierce frowned sharply. "That's not my crew." Walter limped toward the window carefully. Then his expression changed completely. Fear. Real fear. "Oh God." "What?" Maggie asked. The old miner looked back toward Caleb slowly. "Those aren't rescue crews." The lights outside spread wider through the storm. Men moving tactically around the inn. Hunting patterns. Caleb recognized it immediately. Trained movement. Ranger's growl deepened into something savage. Then from outside Mercy House came the unmistakable sound of a shotgun being racked, and someone began pounding on the front door. The sound echoed through the old inn like cannon fire. Every conversation stopped instantly. The frightened travelers gathered near the hearth, pulled closer together, while the children clung to their parents beneath blankets and coats. Ranger lunged toward the entrance with a violent bark, fur standing high along his back. Caleb moved immediately. Not panicked. Focused. The old operator inside him had fully awakened now. Threat assessment. Defensive terrain. Civilian positioning. Protect the room. He crossed toward the front windows and carefully pulled aside the curtain just enough to see through the blizzard outside. Flashlights moved through the snow. 5 men, maybe 6, armed, spread wide around the inn in deliberate formation. Not rescue crews, not locals. Pierce stepped beside Caleb quietly. "I didn't bring those men." Caleb looked at him coldly. "I don't care." The pounding came again, harder this time. "Open the damn door!" The voice outside sounded rough, older. Local accent. Walter Boone went pale near the hearth. Caleb noticed instantly. "You know them." Walter swallowed hard. "Maybe. Maybe isn't good enough." The old miner stared toward the fire several seconds before speaking. "Families around here never forgot the Mercy Gold." Another slam hit the door. The hinges rattled violently. Walter continued quietly. "Some folks spent generations hunting it." Maggie crossed toward Caleb. "What do they want?" Pierce answered before Caleb could. "They think we found the tunnels." The room grew colder somehow, despite the roaring fire. Outside, wind screamed across the ridge hard enough to shake the entire inn. The mountain storm had trapped everyone together inside Mercy House. Hunters, survivors, children, and now armed men outside. Ranger barked furiously again. Caleb crouched beside him briefly, one hand resting against the dog's shoulder. "Easy." But Ranger wasn't afraid. He was warning them, always warning them. Another voice shouted from outside, "We know somebody opened the tunnels!" The stranded travelers exchanged terrified looks. A little girl near the hearth started crying softly. Caleb stood slowly. Decision made. He turned toward Pierce. "How many guns your people carrying?" Pierce hesitated. "3 handguns." "Get them." One of Pierce's men frowned. "You serious?" Caleb's eyes hardened instantly. "You want civilians alive tonight, you listen to me." Something in his voice cut straight through argument. Military command. Absolute. Even now, people obeyed it instinctively. Pierce nodded once. Within moments, the weapons were placed carefully on the table beside the hearth. Walter still held the revolver Caleb gave him earlier. Maggie stared at the growing pile of guns uneasily. "This is insane." "No," Caleb replied quietly. "This is winter in the mountains." Then he pointed toward the frightened travelers. "Move everybody away from the windows." The room exploded into motion again. Parents gathered children. The highway workers pushed heavy tables against weaker parts of the walls. Pierce's men helped reinforce the front entrance with old timber beams scavenged from the collapsed porch. Outside, flashlights moved closer through the whiteout. Then came a voice Caleb recognized. "Walter Boone!" Walter froze. The old miner stepped toward the door carefully. "You should leave, Curtis." The voice outside laughed harshly. "Not without what's under that inn." Walter looked exhausted suddenly. 40 years chasing ghosts. 40 years chasing thieves. Caleb kept listening while he worked. Curtis, local, not professional criminals, something worse. Desperate men who believed the mountain owed them money. That made them unpredictable. Ranger suddenly trotted back toward the hidden passage near the cellar wall. The dog barked once, then again. Caleb followed quickly. The hidden stone panel still stood partially open, cold air spilling from the darkness below. The strange metallic scraping sound echoed upward once more. Closer now. Maggie whispered beside him, "What if somebody's down there?" Caleb looked into the darkness. Not somebody. What then? He didn't answer, because he honestly didn't know. Outside, the men started shouting again. "Last chance!" Then came another sound. Metal striking metal. They were trying to force the door. The children near the hearth cried harder now. Maggie moved among them immediately, calming them softly, while Walter fed more wood into the fire. The giant hearth roared brighter against the storm, bathing Mercy House in deep orange light. The inn felt alive now, like the building itself understood people needed it again. Caleb glanced toward the old journals lying open beside the fireplace. Sheltered below. No one left outside. The past repeating itself. Then Ranger barked sharply toward the back hallway. Caleb spun instantly. A figure stumbled through the rear kitchen entrance half buried in snow. A teenage boy, 17 maybe, frozen nearly blue. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping. Maggie rushed to him immediately. "Oh my God!" The boy pointed weakly toward the storm outside. "There's more." Caleb crouched beside him. "How many?" "Truck slid off the ridge." The boy coughed violently. "My dad, still out there." Without hesitation, Caleb stood. "No." Maggie grabbed his arm instantly. "You can't keep going out there. They'll freeze. You already almost died once tonight." Ranger stood beside the door immediately. Ready. Waiting. Caleb looked toward the frightened travelers gathered around the fire. Then toward the storm outside. His father's words returned again. A fire only matters if somebody cold can sit beside it. The meaning finally felt complete now. Mercy House wasn't protecting gold. It never had been. It protected people. Caleb grabbed his coat. Pierce stepped forward suddenly. "I'll go." Everybody looked at him, even Caleb. Pierce seemed almost surprised by his own words. Then he shrugged slightly. My grandfather froze to death 10 miles from here during a storm in 1962. Silence. The businessman stared into the fire. My father spent his life chasing the Mercy legend because he blamed Elias Mercy for stealing the payroll shipment that could have kept the roads open that winter. Walter's expression softened slightly. Pierce looked toward the frightened travelers. But maybe he was wrong. For the first time since arriving at Mercy House, Caleb believed him. Ranger barked sharply at the front door again. The men outside had reached the porch now. Heavy boots thudded against old wood. Then suddenly, crash! A shotgun blast exploded through the entrance. The reinforced door splintered inward violently. Children screamed. Smoke filled the common room. Ranger lunged instantly with a roar. Caleb moved at the exact same moment. Pure instinct. Pure training. He grabbed the nearest overturned table and shoved it hard toward the broken doorway, just as armed men burst through the snow. The first attacker barely crossed the threshold before Ranger hit him like a missile. The Malinois slammed into the man's chest hard enough to drive him backward into the porch railing. The shotgun flew sideways into the snow while Ranger snarled inches from his throat. The second man raised a pistol. Caleb tackled him before the weapon fully cleared. Both men crashed hard across the floorboards beside the roaring hearth. The attacker swung wildly. Caleb blocked it automatically and drove one brutal punch into the man's ribs. The old combat rhythm returned instantly. Fast, precise, controlled violence. But behind the fight came another sound. A crack. Deep. Heavy. The entire chimney shifted above them. Stone dust rained into the fire. Walter shouted in horror, "The hearth!" The mountain was moving again. The armed men froze. Everyone froze. Then another massive crack split through the chimney foundation. The giant stone hearth, the heart of Mercy House itself, was beginning to collapse. And Ranger was still outside in the storm. The realization hit Caleb harder than the shotgun blast. Snow screamed through the shattered doorway while the old chimney groaned overhead, stones shifting deep inside the walls of Mercy House like bones grinding under pressure. The armed men froze near the entrance. Even they understood what was happening. If the chimney collapsed, the entire heart of the inn could come down with it, and Ranger was still somewhere beyond the whiteout. Caleb shoved the stunned attacker aside and lunged toward the broken doorway without hesitation. "Caleb!" Maggie shouted. But he was already gone. The blizzard swallowed him instantly. Wind slammed against his body hard enough to steal breath from his lungs, while snow blinded everything beyond a few feet. The porch had nearly vanished beneath fresh drifts. "Ranger!" The storm swallowed his voice whole. Then came another deep crack from inside the inn. The chimney. Time running out. Caleb forced himself down the porch steps into knee-deep snow while the mountain roared around him. The flashlight beam shook violently through the whiteout. Nothing. No movement. No dog. Only endless snow and darkness. Then suddenly, a bark. Faint. Somewhere near the stable. Caleb ran toward the sound immediately. The old stable leaned dangerously beneath heavy snow near the rear side of Mercy House. Wind tore through the broken boards while avalanche debris buried half the structure already. Another bark. Closer now. Then Caleb saw him. Ranger stood near the stable doors, snarling at a shadow crouched in the snow. One of the armed men. The man held a knife low in one hand while trying desperately to reach the stable entrance behind him. Ranger blocked him completely. The dog's chest heaved in the cold air, teeth flashing white through the storm. The attacker lunged suddenly. Everything happened at once. Ranger launched forward. The man swung the knife wildly. Caleb shouted. Then the dog slammed into the attacker hard enough to drive both of them sideways into the snowbank beside the stable wall. The knife disappeared. The man screamed. Ranger's growl turned savage. But then Caleb saw the blood, dark against the snow. Too much blood. "Ranger!" The attacker scrambled backward in terror and vanished into the blizzard without looking back. Ranger staggered once, then collapsed hard into the snow. Caleb reached him in seconds. The knife wound sat deep along the dog's side just behind the ribs. Blood soaked through the thick fur almost immediately. "No, no, no." The words escaped Caleb before he realized he was speaking. Ranger tried to rise again anyway, still trying to work, still trying to protect. Caleb dropped to both knees in the snow and pressed both hands hard against the wound. The dog whined softly. That sound broke something inside him. Not the blood, not the injury, the sound. Because Ranger had carried him through years of nightmares without complaint. Through war, through panic attacks, through every broken piece of life Caleb no longer knew how to fix. And now the dog was bleeding into the snow because he had protected him again. The stable doors suddenly burst open. Pierce emerged carrying an old lantern. His face changed instantly when he saw the blood. "Oh God, help me!" No argument, no hesitation. Together they lifted Ranger carefully between them, while the blizzard howled across the ridge. The dog's breathing had grown shallow now, too shallow. Caleb felt panic crawling up his throat. Not again. Not another partner. Inside Mercy House, chaos still raged. The chimney continued cracking overhead, while stranded travelers crowded away from the damaged hearth. Smoke drifted through the common room from broken mortar seams. But the moment Maggie saw Ranger, everything else disappeared. "Table!" she snapped instantly. People moved automatically. The old dining table near the fire cleared within seconds, while Maggie grabbed medical supplies from her truck bags. Caleb laid Ranger down carefully. The dog tried weakly to lift his head. Caleb crouched beside him immediately. "Easy, buddy." Ranger's eyes found him instantly, still focused, still loyal, always loyal. Maggie cut through the blood-soaked fur carefully. The room watched in silence. Even the armed men near the entrance stood frozen now. The storm outside faded beneath the sound of Ranger breathing harder with every minute. Maggie's face tightened. Knife missed the lung. Caleb exhaled shakily. But there's internal bleeding." The words landed like bullets. Caleb gripped the edge of the table hard enough for his knuckles to whiten. The dog whined softly again, then rested his head weakly against Caleb's arm. Flashbacks hit Caleb instantly. Another partner bleeding out overseas. Another impossible choice. Another life slipping away while he stood helpless beside it. His breathing started changing again. Fast, sharp, tunnel vision narrowing around him. Maggie saw it immediately. "Caleb." He barely heard her. All he could see was blood. All he could hear was screaming from years ago buried beneath gunfire and collapsing concrete. Then Ranger's paw shifted weakly against his wrist, grounding him. Even now, even dying, the dog was trying to steady him. Caleb closed his eyes hard, then slowly steadied his breathing. "One breath," he whispered to himself. Then another, and another. The room returned around him. Mercy House. Firelight. Snowstorm. Ranger alive. Still alive. Maggie worked quickly beside the hearth, while Walter and the stranded travelers reinforced the cracking chimney with old support beams scavenged from the collapsed porch. The giant fireplace still burned despite the damage, still fighting to stay alive. Like the inn itself refused to die while people needed shelter. Pierce crossed quietly toward Caleb, holding something wrapped in oilcloth. "The letters," he said softly. Caleb looked up. Pierce set the bundle carefully beside him. "I found them in the tunnel after the collapse shifted." Maggie kept stitching carefully while Caleb opened the letters with trembling hands. The top page looked older than the others. Yellowed, fragile, written in fading ink. Elias Mercy's handwriting. Caleb read silently while the fire crackled beside him. March 3rd, 1884. The storm has buried the lower camps again. Children arrived near frozen. Army gold remains hidden beneath the mountain. If the government calls me thief, then let them. No traveler should freeze while a fire still burns. Caleb stopped breathing for a moment. The words hit him harder than they should have, because suddenly he heard his father again. Not in memory. Perfectly clear. Standing beside a Wyoming fireplace years ago saying, "A fire only matters if somebody cold can sit beside it." Same lesson, different century. The realization shook him deeply. Elias Mercy hadn't stolen gold for greed. He had sacrificed himself to keep strangers alive. Exactly what Mercy House was still doing tonight. Caleb looked around the inn slowly. Families sleeping near the hearth. Children warming frozen hands beside the flames. Travelers surviving the storm because this old building still stood. The mountain had not changed. Neither had the purpose of the inn. Ranger stirred weakly beneath Maggie's hands. Caleb immediately leaned closer. "I'm here." The dog's tail moved once against the blanket. Small, but real. Maggie finally exhaled softly. "I think he's going to make it." The relief that hit Caleb nearly dropped him to his knees. He lowered his head against Ranger's neck for one long second. Eyes closed. No words. Just gratitude. Outside, the blizzard finally began to weaken. The wind softened slightly against the walls of Mercy House while dawn's first gray light slowly touched the snow-covered valley beyond the windows. Walter stared toward the mountains quietly. "Storm's breaking." Pierce stood near the fire in silence, then finally spoke. "My father spent his whole life believing Elias Mercy ruined this valley." He looked toward the sleeping children near the hearth. "Maybe he saved it." Nobody answered. Because deep down, they all knew it was true. The fire burned lower as dawn spread slowly across Black Hollow, and beside the ancient hearth of Mercy House, Caleb Ryder finally understood why Ranger never stopped guarding the mountain. The dog had not been protecting treasure. He had been protecting unfinished duty. Morning came slowly to Black Hollow. The storm clouds broke apart over the San Juan Mountains in long silver ribbons, while sunlight touched the valley for the first time in nearly 2 days. Snow covered everything. Rooftops, pine trees, abandoned trucks along the ridge road, transforming the mountains into a silent white ocean. And at the center of it all stood Mercy House, scarred, cracked, but still standing. Smoke drifted steadily from the repaired chimney into the cold Colorado sky. Inside the old inn, the great hearth burned low and warm while exhausted travelers slept beneath blankets scattered across the common room floor. The blizzard was over. But something deeper had changed during the night. Something none of them could fully explain yet. Caleb sat beside Ranger near the fire, one hand resting gently against the dog's side where Maggie's stitches disappeared beneath clean bandages. Ranger slept deeply now, for the first time in days. The dog's breathing had steadied overnight. Each rise and fall of his chest felt like another impossible gift. Caleb had not moved far from him once, not even to sleep. Maggie stepped quietly from the kitchen, carrying fresh coffee. "You should rest." Caleb looked toward Ranger. "I'm fine." "That's the second biggest lie you've told me." He almost smiled. Almost. Maggie handed him the mug anyway, before sitting beside him near the hearth. The firelight softened the exhaustion in her face while morning sunlight crept slowly across the old floorboards behind them. For a while neither spoke. Only the crackling fire filled the silence. Then Maggie finally looked toward him. "You stayed alive for that dog." Caleb stared into the flames. "No." His voice came low and rough. "That dog kept me alive." Maggie said nothing, because she understood. Some grief didn't need explanation. Across the room, Walter Boone sat at the long table with several county deputies who had finally reached Mercy House after the roads reopened. Pierce stood nearby, speaking quietly with a state historian who had arrived with the rescue crews. The hidden chambers beneath the inn were no longer secret. News had spread fast, too fast. Army lockboxes recovered from the tunnels now rested carefully sealed beside the wall under deputy supervision. Historians moved carefully around the journals and ledgers Caleb recovered from beneath the mountain. And everywhere inside Mercy House, one name kept being spoken quietly. Elias Mercy. Not thief anymore. Protector. The truth buried for over a century had finally surfaced through snow, blood, and firelight. Walter folded his weathered hands together slowly. My grandfather tried telling people the real story before he died. One deputy glanced up. Why didn't anyone listen? Walter looked toward the hearth. Because folks prefer stories about stolen gold. His eyes drifted toward the sleeping travelers nearby. But the truth was always simpler. The old miner pointed toward the fire. He fed people. Silence settled warmly through the inn again. The state historian approached Caleb carefully a few minutes later, carrying one of the recovered journals. You should see this. Caleb looked up slowly. The woman opened the fragile pages carefully beside the firelight. Near the back sat one final letter written in fading ink. The handwriting belonged to Elias Mercy himself. Caleb read silently. If this place survives me, let the fire remain lit. Storms will come again. Travelers will always lose their road, and someone must open the door when they do. Caleb swallowed hard. The words landed deep, because suddenly he understood why the mountains had drawn him here after losing everything. Not by accident, not fate, purpose. The same purpose Elias Mercy carried through those deadly winters long ago. Protect the lost. Feed the cold. Keep the fire burning. Ranger stirred weakly beside him. Caleb immediately reached down. The dog opened one tired eye, then rested his head against Caleb's boot. Still there, still watching the room. Always watching. The state historian smiled softly. That dog saved history. Caleb shook his head quietly. He saved people. Outside, helicopters finally passed low across the valley, carrying emergency supplies toward isolated mountain towns still buried by the storm. Rescue trucks crawled carefully along reopened roads, while neighbors checked on each other from cabin to cabin across Black Hollow. And through all of it, Mercy House remained full. No one seemed eager to leave. The stranded families lingered near the warmth of the hearth. Children helped Walter stack fresh wood beside the fire, while Maggie treated frostbite and minor injuries at the long dining table. Even Pierce stayed, though something inside the man had clearly changed. Near noon, he crossed quietly toward Caleb carrying a folded document. I signed over my land claims around the inn. Caleb frowned slightly. What? Pierce handed him the papers. No mining rights, no development permits, nothing. Why? Pierce stared toward the giant hearth. My father spent his life trying to prove Elias Mercy was a criminal. His expression darkened slightly. Turns out he was the best man in this valley. Caleb studied him carefully. Pierce gave a tired shrug. Some stories deserve to stay alive. Then he nodded once toward Ranger. And some guardians, too. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Pierce extended his hand. This time, Caleb shook it. Not forgiveness, not friendship. Something quieter. Understanding. By late afternoon, the county crews finally cleared enough road for the stranded travelers to leave safely. One by one, they gathered coats and supplies near the doorway of Mercy House. But before leaving, almost every person stopped beside the hearth first. Some touched the old limestone gently. Others simply stood in silence, staring into the fire, as though they somehow understood the building had protected them too. The little girl Caleb rescued from the school bus crossed toward him shyly before leaving. "You gonna stay here?" Caleb glanced around the inn slowly, at the journals, the fire, the mountain light spilling across the ancient floorboards, at Ranger sleeping beside the hearth. Then he nodded. "Yeah." The girl smiled softly. "Good." Then she hugged Ranger carefully before following her family outside. By sunset, Mercy House finally grew quiet again. Only Caleb, Maggie, Walter, and Ranger remained. The old miner sat near the fire with tears shining faintly in his tired eyes. "Never thought I'd see this place alive again." Maggie smiled softly from the kitchen doorway. "It was waiting." Walter nodded slowly. "Yes." His gaze drifted toward Caleb. "For him." Outside, the mountains glowed deep blue beneath fresh snow, while smoke rose peacefully from the chimney of Mercy House. The valley looked untouched, ancient, timeless. Caleb stood slowly and crossed toward the guest ledger, resting open near the hearth. The same ledger that recorded generations of travelers once sheltered from storms. He picked up the pen beside it, then paused. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, emotion. Finally, he wrote carefully beneath the last historic entry. February 14th. Storm survivors sheltered safely at Mercy House. Fire still burning. He stared at the words quietly, then closed the ledger gently. 1 year later, Mercy House officially reopened. Not as a hotel, not as a tourist attraction, as a refuge. Truckers stopped there during storms. Veterans passing through the mountains found warm meals waiting beside the hearth. Lost travelers received coffee before questions. And every winter night, smoke rose from the chimney into the frozen Colorado sky. Caleb cooked simple meals over the restored fire while Ranger slept nearby beneath the glow of the flames, scarred but healed, always facing the front door. Still guarding, still listening, still protecting unfinished duty. Then one snowy evening near Christmas, a knock sounded at the door. Caleb looked up from the hearth. Outside stood a freezing young man beside a broken-down truck buried in snow. Lost, cold, alone. For one brief second, Caleb saw himself standing there a year ago with $10 left in his pocket and nowhere else to go. Then, he opened the door wider. Warm firelight spilled out into the storm. "Come inside," Caleb said quietly. "Fire's still warm." The young man stepped into Mercy House, and behind him, beyond the snow-covered valley and the dark mountain roads, the fire continued burning. If you believe a warm fire and an open door can still change someone's life, type fire down in the comments. And if you've ever had to start over with nothing but grit and loyalty beside you, we'd love to hear where you're watching from tonight. Subscribe and stay with us for more stories about second chances, quiet strength, and the people who still stand their ground when the world turns cold.